We have a very ambitious title for the session, Creating More Effective, Productive and Resilient Supply Chains. Fortunately, we have some very good panelists, so I'd like to call them on the stage. First one is John Thorbeck, Chairman of Change Capital. Clickers right there, yes. And then we have Brad Ballantyne, the CEO of MAS Acme US. And Scott Walton, Head of Global Business Development for Kornit Digital.
Hello everyone.
All right, so I'll introduce the session a little bit, and then I'll ask my questions, and what we actually mean by this systemic change will hopefully become apparent. So we're focusing on the capabilities of apparel manufacturers to deliver an alternative approach to the current, we would say, unproductive apparel sourcing and distribution models. And these alternative models focus on supply flexibility to react to consumer demand, increasing profitability, productivity across the supply chain. We are going to discuss how material suppliers, garment manufacturers can create smart flexibility by postponing production commitments. That's a key word. And this requires a mix of process and data tools. But, and I think that's really important when we're talking about it, it requires a change of mindset. It's an important session because we are dealing directly with the root causes of the industry's toughest dilemmas. Unlocking capital needed to invest in sustainability, replacing enforced flexibility with what we would call smart flexibility, improving purchasing practices, and giving manufacturers the ability to take the initiative and to create value and to step out of the current, often occurring low price traps. So having said that, it's my pleasure to first turn to John. And John, you're authoring a study that is being supported by ITC, the International Trade Center, and IAF. And you talk about money getting unlocked in the supply chain, and that sounds appealing. Tell us how it works.
Okay, well, money, I'm going to certainly refer to capital, but let me try to give a little bit of context here, and I really am very grateful to Tom Glazer. He gave us a very articulate introduction, I think, to these subjects. He used a key word, which is post-COVID hangover, and that's a lead-in to where we are. I might also say I think I have a Tom Glazer hangover after that remarkable coverage of very, very challenging issues. So to get to Matthias's question here, for all the reasons Tom articulated, this attracted the attention of this sector, this industry, textiles and clothing worldwide, attracted the attention of the United Nations, and in particular the International Trade Center based in Geneva. So I'd like to call out my colleague here from the ITC who's joined us from Geneva, Rob Skidmore, so you all know who Rob is. Come on, stand up, stand up. So these issues don't just concern our own industry, and we're not just talking to ourselves here. We're dealing with a sector that is really struggling with global competitiveness, and that was really the origin between the ITC and the IAF to look at this breakdown in supply chains, and certainly the breakdown in trust and in contracts in the COVID period. And I'm going to try in very few slides to just give you a preview of a forthcoming study. The question asked here, I would like to go into the title, but I hope it's suggestive of a non-Western point of view and using Asian symbols of under the banyan tree, a place to come together. And our particular focus is the buyer-supplier relationship. So the question we're asking here is, what is fashion's alternative approach to create value versus low-cost global production? You would have that question if you were a US producer, or if you were in Europe, or if you were in Asia, you were in Bangladesh, or you were in China. And all of those are case scenarios within this study. So our particular point of view is how to reimagine upstream value and to do it with process and productivity. And the goal here is to revolutionize risk over cost. Now I have to be careful about that phrase, because when I say risk, it often isn't how you might interpret it. You might interpret this in audit or compliance, or a ship that gets stuck in the Suez Canal, or a tsunami in Indonesia. So when I'm talking about risk, I'm talking about inventory, and inventory is capital. And capital is the obstacle to sustainability. The issue of scarce capital means that inventory and sustainability both cannot be achieved without some change in this industry. So those are two sides of the same coin. So risk, to me, is a business model. It's not a buzzword. It really is a different business model. And we're quoting Warren Houseman here, who's very influential in this particular study, which is that the battlefield of competition is really supply chain to supply chain, not brand to brand, not product to product, and not price to price. So shared risk elevates a supply chain perspective end to end in all tiers of the supply chain. And it is meant to complement a financial point of view in shared value, and an organizational point of view in shared purpose. So the three together, integrated, represents, I think, a turn to the future. So shared risk, what do you mean? Let's get past its kind of PR quality and try to define it in terms of end-to-end metrics rather than firm metrics. So if we really have supply chain to supply chain competition, what are the metrics and the language that reflects that? So I won't go through these one by one, but there's 8 here. And this is just the first part of the list. But I hope everybody notices that these key metrics do not include ex-factory price. So the ability to create value, especially recreating upstream value, actually is not dependent on an ex-factory price. So where is non-price value created? Well, there's actually new technology that's very promising as part of the case scenarios within this study, and it goes end to end. But it's technology designed for risk, quantifying and calculating risk over cost. All current systems, if even they exist, are built to minimize cost, and they generally come from a retailer that backs up into the supply chain. So what is more of a supplier-led design for decision support and technology? These are just 3 examples, but SXD, the founder of SXD, is Shelley Xu. Shelley is ex-Prada, ex-Instagram, and she says we can do better in the design process and eliminate the dead stock problem in the beginning of the supply chain. Platform E, who's actually with us here today, is not just 3D design and development. We know all about that. Platform E excels in the luxury segment, in European production, in taking a customized approach, and asks the question of why is that a limited opportunity? Why isn't that an opportunity at scale? And they're doing impressively well in the highest cost production segment of our industry. ServTech, a couple of guys from consulting who spent all their time advising clients around the world on how to improve their Excel spreadsheet planning. They said, we can do better. So who is the lead investor in ServTech? It's Google. Google sees global inventory as a data problem, an unsolved, big, hairy problem, and they want to participate in it. So we'll talk a little bit more about new technology and how it's being applied at the factory level. But I've heard comments that I might respond to in passing here, which is, where's the young people in this industry? All of these are 30-year-olds and younger. There is a whole army out there of people who want to reinvent this business, and it's very exciting that they have a different view and do not view this business as low growth, low profit, and low tech. That to them screams opportunity rather than being, doomed to that kind of performance. So overall, we need to reimagine our sources of value. So the perspective we take is not just supplier innovation, but it looks at the first mile, furthest upstream, to actually create value. Now that's an inversion of an industry that sees creating value as sell more. We would actually argue sell less, but sell it more profitably, and remove the unneeded inventory and the excess production. That represents an enormous financial opportunity. So it's taken me a few slides to get to the question again, but that's what defines this report. The money is the capital that is locked up in inventory, and so productivity is the key source of going forward. We have to also look at our supply chains in terms of creating value, in terms of what upstream value creates downstream value. Most people look at Apple as a product company, when in fact its financial model and its remarkable $3 trillion valuation is based on supply chain strategy of negative working capital, okay? The strategy for risk in the last mile, creating an advantage out of variety and convenience at Amazon, 60% of their volume, they don't hold that inventory, somebody else owns that. Walmart is a distribution story. So these are strategies for risk, and they're meant to create value, and they speak to the two biggest issues in this entire industry, which is excess inventory and too little sustainability. So they go together. So this is the business model for shared risk, and shared risk is our shared purpose. So thanks for giving me all that time.
Great job, thanks. That's what we're looking at. We are looking at, if we look at the bullish future, we're looking at ways to make that come true, I think, and looking at risk in the way that you explain, improving productivity. Then, of course, we also have people that are actually doing that just right now, and we're very fortunate to have Brad Valentine involved, or working with, if not one of the largest manufacturing groups in the world. So when speaking about non-price value, can you give an example from the MAS experience? And particularly, I'm also interested, if this value is created, can you also say something about how it's shared in the supply chain between the supplier and the client?
Well, the first thing is it takes courage to change the narrative. As manufacturers, we all wonder, how do we show up from a place of strength instead of a place of weakness? We all feel weak because we get pressured for price. So what we've been able to do is change that narrative. And you'll hear a lot of what John said here. We hold the levers, manufacturers, we hold the levers. We have to pull the levers and have the conversation to move from lowest cost to shared risk, shared purpose, shared risk, and shared value. We have to change the conversation from lead time being a function of manufacturing locations and have it more as a function of process innovation. Of course, we can save the transportation time, but without the process innovation, we're sub-optimizing manufacturing locations. We have to move from Excel spreadsheets that we use for everything, even things that don't have calculation in them, a tech pack. Why do we do tech packs in Excel? To scalable technologies, and these scalable technologies are available now in the marketplace and have, as John said, these are young entrepreneurs that haven't been in the industry that see huge opportunity. I think it's amazing. So ultimately, when we walk in to see a customer, the standard is we walk in with a suitcase full of samples and we lay all of these things on the table and said, look at all these great things we can do. But we don't talk about how we do them. The how is really, in many cases, more important. So we have to walk in and present an alternative solution. Rather than throwing a bunch of samples on the table, let's walk in and talk business model first. Here's how we're going to solve for the largest cost problem in the entire value chain, and that's markdowns and stockouts. It far eclipses, in some cases, multiple, 2.5 times. The FOB is lost in markdowns and stockouts. As an industrial engineer, we always went to the thing that cost the most to fix, yet we didn't do it. And so with NAS, we've changed the narrative. We've had the courage. It's in our mission and value statement. We have the courage to change, and that's what we've done.
Thanks, Brad. I encourage you all to look at what's happening and how these narratives are changing, and you're doing this. I think other manufacturers are starting to do this and find a new sense of assertiveness in approaching this. So it's also about taking the initiative right there.
And I have to say, I failed to say this, my apologies. You might be curious, okay, what's the response? If we're talking to a retail merchant, the response is overwhelmingly, oh my gosh, you can help me reduce risk, improves full price sell-through, sign me up. And then we go through the process of finding all the barriers to getting things done. But I have an interesting story. I used to do business with, or have done business with a retailer, and they were evaluating a ton of suppliers, and they came to see me. I was last, and they said, tell us about your business. And we presented a different business model, an agile business model that helps you increase full price sell-through. Scratched their head and looked at us and said, it's funny. Everybody else we talked to said that we make the best product, but they all buy from the same yarn place, they all buy the same fabrics, they all use the same machines, and it's in an automated environment, literally the same machine. How is it possible for everybody to make the best product? And he told us, well, you're the first person that's brought an innovative business model to our attention, and we got the business.
So you were able to bring them the best results, which is, anyway, what we're all looking at.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Well, I'd like to turn to Scott, because it's good that we also have here in the panel a company that is delivering solutions, because to change this sort of paradigm, we need everything. We need the technology as well. But I would first like to also ask you, somebody we haven't talked about here, that's the consumer, because in the end, it's all about the consumer. That's not an easy one. So from your experience, how should industry actually react to uncertain demand, which is a given?
Yeah, so just to frame it slightly, so Kornit is an on-demand industrial printing manufacturer. And specifically, I think the way to address that question is kind of leveraging culture, and specifically digital culture. So, we spoke yesterday a lot about the macro, aspect, the macro influences here, and I think there's also one maybe overlooked slightly, which is also, let's frame it in an overstock situation, as John said. When you see that acceleration right now, it's only going to continue to get more and more uncertain in terms of capturing the trend in the moment. So as the digital enablement tools that are out there from companies like Platform E, for example, with the 3D aspect of it, we need to digitize the full value chain all the way through to the manufacturer. Because that increasing uncertainty will continue, and being able to have, we specialize in last mile fulfillment. We're not producing stuff or printing stuff offshore. Primarily, we're doing it onshore. And it's leveraging those sort of connection points to almost be in the trend or in the season at that particular time, and then react accordingly. To give you an idea of some of the brands that we work with directly in Europe, some of you may know CNA, probably one of the oldest brands, actually, about 150 years old. And even today, they're still planning, they would have started planning around August, September for spring, summer 2024. And they'll be planning digital printing, they'll be planning analog printing then, and it baffles me how they can predict trend 9 to 12 months out of what the prints are going to be or what the designs might be. So it's sort of leveraging those and blending those together and having that last mile fulfillment. But in terms of the culture now within the digital world, it's shifted. It's shifted from retail through to e-commerce. It's now social commerce. And then one step further is with Gen Alpha, which is in the game, right? You have 66 million people every single day interacting in Roblox. 66 million eyeballs that are creating digital assets in the game. These are wearable products, right? It's called user-generated content. Over 10 million people every single day creating these assets. And it just shows you now the disconnect between the brands and where the actual audiences of the future generation are. I think that's a key aspect when it comes to the consumer and future-proofing, and also going upstream to meet that consumer demand as well.
Yeah. So the way industry interacts with the final consumer is changing really quickly, and you need the models and the technology to cope with that.
You need the technology, you need the supply chain efficiency, you need to digitize that supply chain, and it's a combination, between technology providers like ourselves, obviously with Brad, with MAS, etc., blending offshore, nearshore, and onshore ultimately. But you have brands now which, I don't know if anyone knows this brand, Prime. Probably not a lot of you do, right? This is the second largest hydration drink in the world. 150 million units sold in, let's say, 18 months. And it's a creative brand. It's Logan Paul, the influencer. And I think we're going to see a lot more convergence between brands, collaborations between traditional brands and new creator-led brands as well, which is massively disrupting the industry.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Hot. I'm turning to John now again. And what I think, the study's not out, but it will be relatively soon. I've read the drafts, of course. So you're hammering home the point that this more productive sourcing model that we've talking about actually works across geographies, across different market segments, across different products. So rather than looking at it as a niche thing or something that's slowly growing, you think it's something, and you have done sort of case studies in these different geographies and market segments that shows this approach works.
That's right. The language is different. I try not to use the code words of efficiency and partnership and collaboration and substitutes for essentially what is a cost conversation. So we really want to look at reducing risk in all tiers of the supply chain, and you really want to calculate that in capital terms. So in a shared risk environment, and for those of you who want sort of the production technique, it's supply flexibility driven by postponement. The metrics for that are all levers furthest upstream. So it isn't the volume of the order and the price, the unit price, those levers actually break down the finished goods order into these components, which create downstream value. And they speak to the two biggest drivers of market capitalization in retail today, which is inventory and sustainability. One of the things that is actually a little disturbing to me is how removed the supplier community is from the language of shareholders and the role that they play in terms of creating upstream value. So whether the issue is the profitability of an order, or it's the working capital and the cash cycles, whether it's forecast accuracy, what's the forecast accuracy at 12 months out on a design cycle, what's the forecast accuracy on an order cycle at 4 and 5 months, and how does 12 months compare to 12 weeks? We're not talking about incremental change here, we're not talking about operational improvement over the next 5 years. There's a manufacturing revolution that I actually think is in the making. I think the tools and the technology and the processes are evident, as you will read in this survey. So the larger question to me isn't the answer, it's why the obstacles. And I think the supplier community needs the confidence behind an alternative to the demands for lowest cost.
Great, thanks. And well, that brings me to Brad, because I'm very eager to hear how this plays out in practice. We hear postponement. That's something that you're doing, right? So what are some of the best ways, if you would be a manufacturer, to make this shift? What do you actually do?
Well, the first thing we have to do is examine the trade-offs. If we want an unlimited amount of options in the supply chain, then we're locked into a long, rigid, risky supply chain. So what are the trade-offs from moving from a long, rigid, risky supply chain with unlimited possibilities to a rapid, flexible, low-risk supply chain that still has plenty of options? What are the trade-offs? So quote Shelley Hsu, John brought her up, she's done amazing work. If you go to sxd.com, ShelleyHshuDesign.com, the first thing that pops up is beauty under constraints. So a high fashion designer is thinking about constraints. How do we create something beautiful within constraints? And these don't have to be very tight constraints, but we can get to market quickly and efficiently with very low risk, very low working capital, very low environmental impact. If we can just talk about upfront, what are the parameters, what are we playing with here, how do we solve problems within the constraints of having a sustainable business model? That's the biggest piece that we have to take in consideration. And look, retailers, brands and retailers are always going to have a component of their business that you decide to take a risk on. Completely understand that. But to take a risk on your entire assortment every single season, placing 100% of your POs, I mean, in many cases 6 months before you launch, and in many cases before you even get the current season sell-through data, it's guessing at best, and we're living with the results.
So just to clarify, when you're also speaking, the first part of your answer was about reduction of complexity. You mean that, like, the size of a collection, the number of SKUs, the complexity of the products themselves, all of that?
I have an example that helps illustrate it. So we have a customer that has 1,100 raw material SKUs. It's a big customer. 100 of the 1,100 make up 80% of what they buy. All right, so you're thinking about there, like, it's a really long tail. And then this customer has multiple brands, and I think only 9 of the 1,100 SKUs are used across multiple brands. So it's almost like we don't even realize what we're doing, during the design process. We lack visibility from designer to designer. PLM systems don't really give us that. That's more of a data entry function. We wake up one day and realize that we have so many raw material SKUs that we can't postpone all of them. It would be financial suicide to take us a gray fabric position on 1,100 SKUs or a color position, whatever. So that complexity, if we can narrow it down, we can stage 50 of those hundreds effectively, especially as a manufacturer if we can use them across multiple brands.
And what do you mean by staging?
So staging would mean we take a position on grade. We go ahead and buy an amount of gray goods, preferably hold it at a dye facility, and we watch point of sale data. We watch it, it turns, we get a better idea of what's going on. Then we can dye in stages. So typically, if you hold grades at a dye facility, there's no reason why you can't get it dyed in a day or two, as long as we stage capacity. So we stage raw material, stage capacity, and then we can go into cut and sew. You can produce, in any factory in the world, you should be able to produce something in 10 days. If you have the raw materials, if you stage the capacity, and that particular design's been matched well with the manufacturer, that's postponement.
Yeah.
So you cannot postpone unlimited options. So postpone a piece of your business. Take the time that you would spend on making tech backs and figuring out the exact, stitches per inch of a woven fabric different from the one you had last season. Take that time that you would spend there and spend it on taking the risk. Spend it on, okay, what's the new thing? How do we get ahead of the market?
Yeah. So you reduce complexity, you postpone stage, and by doing that, you reduce inventory. You're produce closer to what the customer actually wants.
Yeah, and when John says 12 weeks, that's real.
Yeah.
We're going from 12 months to 12 weeks, and the way we do that is about talking about the trade-offs. And I'm not forcing our customers to do all of their business in 12 weeks. We're saying there's a piece of your business that we can do in 12 weeks if we have an agreed upon set of materials and capacities and chassis ahead of season.
Okay, great. That sounds like something that can be done, and that is done.
It is being done.
Scott, final question to you, and then we'd like some questions from the audience. So having heard all this, being very much involved in this from Kornit, what do you see as the future for apparel supply chains?
I think as well, I'm fortunate enough to be in an on-demand sort of collaboration group, of which Brad and many other people much smarter than I are kind of looking at ways to really build this connectivity lattice between offshore, nearshore, and ultimately onshore. I think where Kornit specifically come into the value proposition, if you like, coming back to the slide around Amazon as well, is the book industry, how they completely transformed and disrupted that book industry and made it digital and made it on demand. When something sells, they make it. And I think coming back to Brad's point, being able to stage and postpone and saying, the CNA scenario, we're going to produce 50,000 pink flamingo t-shirts, right? We're going to produce them for next summer. Why produce 50,000, right? Why not make 50,000 garments, but have a certain percentage of those garments onshore, where you could not only replenish the pink flamingo if it does do well, but you can test and repeat, and you can, test the market. And essentially, that's what a lot of the digitally native brands are doing very successfully, is read and repeat. So I think that's the connectivity, the digitalization of it, and it's working with the larger tier 1 manufacturers, enabling what on-demand technology can do. And just one final point, this isn't a compromise, because everything that we do is fully sustainable, right? So we're not saying there's a trade-off here. It's fully sustainable, it's a waterless technology, and so yeah, that's kind of the way I see the matrix.
Yeah, that sounds like a good direction. In the bull instead of the bear part of the future. We started with you, John. Final word before we go to questions.
Okay, so a couple of questions. What's your excuse? I hear too much that says, I'm not sure my retailer will do that. Quoted in this study are both Inditex and H&M, and they both say the same thing. It's a broken industry, and we're concerned about the industry as much as we are about ourselves. Inditex says we're going to double down on sustainability, whether it makes sense commercially or not. So you have friends in the best of retail, and if the best of retail is saying we have a broken relationship, then I think you have more of an audience than you might think. So, first question is, what's your excuse? The second one is, what's your alternative? That is really the strongest argument. So the road to profitability is actually productivity. Not the most exciting word. Process innovation probably isn't the sexiest word either. But that's what's built the electronics industry, it's built the auto industry, and I think it's the opportunity for the textile industry.
Great. Now let's see what you want to know, and maybe some of you want to answer that question.
Who wants to give an excuse? I'll take the first question. So Brad, I kind of wanted to dig into a little bit more what you were talking about. I mean, you were talking about design to manufacture from a brand to manufacturer perspective, but we've, in the manufacturing space, have kind of lamented and had a lot of complaints about the actual designers themselves not understanding how to design the manufacturer. I mean, the best example I always give is, Ivanka Trump had a line of scarves recalled because they were flammable while she was the president's daughter. So if the president's daughter still, is not immune from manufacturing standards or product safety standards, then no one is. And so, how have you seen that shift? And while we have, academics and universities in the room, how do we change that perception to where designers need to understand the manufacturing process again? Are you seeing a shift in the right direction, or are we still having trouble with that?
It's still choppy, in my opinion, what we see today. There are some really fantastic organization institutes. Jen Guarino is here. She's done a fantastic job of training people from the ground up to understand what manufacturing is. We often say it, Jen, right? We have to understand manufacturing before we can have an end-to-end approach. Sherry Berry and Angela Johnson at the Fabric Incubator have done amazing work to help train. I think they have 1,000 entrepreneurs in the queue to train end-to-end. They train all the way from, look at trend all the way to how do you set up a website and ship product. So there are resources out there to train, but if you look at, a standard curricula, we've got people from the university that have got products up here, standard curricula in a fashion institute, in order to attract students has to be high fashion. Now, this is very, very exciting. And I think sometimes we kind of set a poor precedent. So they come out of school, they go to work for us, you sit them down and hand them an Excel spreadsheet and say, fill this tech back out. That is not sexy. And I think, we've got to change the narrative. So that, and I think also the trade-offs, to go back to that. What are the trade-offs? We can do high fashion, unlimited, opportunities, but it's going to be risky, it's going to be long, and it's going to be risky. A bit of change mid-season. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah, anybody, how did you kind of experience that in your tech world and training?
Yeah, I think, a lot of our technology is blessed with being super automated, right? So, but I think the question that I get faced a lot with, surely you're kind of, people are losing their jobs over your technology, but, coming back to the point, it's about the last mile fulfillment, is to react on the trend, and those systems aren't historically offshore or even nearshore that much, right? It's onshore, so I think it's an enablement feature of it. But I agree, Sherry Berry, and there's lots, Jen, for sure, and we have the same in Europe as well. A lot of these, they're not just NGOs, they're fully commercialized businesses, but yeah, they're upskilling significant people, again, to bring it onshore in the UK specifically.
Jen, do you have thoughts on that?
Fire away, let's hear it.
Brad, I'm enjoying this conversation so much. I agree with so much of this. I have too much to say. I want to continue to listen.
All right, we got time for 2 questions.
Hi, my name is Valerie Mayen. I'm a very, very small business in Cleveland, Ohio. I came in late to your speech, so I'm being transparent, so I got the last 20 minutes of it. But my question is for small businesses like myself. So I am a peanut compared to some of the mammoths in this room. But what I'm noticing is that a lot of small designers like myself, that we're handmade, we're made domestically, we do small batch. We are proponents and advocates of slow fashion, but I'm hearing so much about sustainability and greenwashing, and everyone and their mom has a sustainable approach to fashion, but we're all really just adding to the heap, regardless if we make dresses from linen that are made from granola or tree bark or whether our grandmother makes it by hand in Italy. My question is, what resources are available from these kinds of conferences or these kinds of digital approaches or this kind of information for smaller brands that don't have the bandwidth, the capital, the means to be able to access it? Because if it's these smaller brands and entrepreneurs that are paving the way, that are going to be the next generation of manufacturing, what can be provided to them in terms of resources and education so that they can actually have access to it? I know that was like 5 questions, but.
All right, go ahead, we'll tackle it, all of us.
I think you're one of the heroes, and I think you have a significant advantage because you're not, you need to build from the beginning, build a culture into speed and flexibility, and you don't have to fight the cultural change. A very, very important part of the study was to focus on 3 women entrepreneurs who have small ventures who built a negative working capital model so they didn't need external capital and are able to build this on their relationship with their supplier. It's and we think, and it was not just 3 significant women who are building a success story on the business model. We think these 3 women represent a revolution around the world. We think there are ventures like that across Brazil, Asia, of course, the Americas, and we use them as an example. So it's not an issue of scale here. In fact, scale is the obstacle to the kind of non-incremental change that needs to be made. We're talking about transition of a fashion system and a transformation, which is a change in embedded habits that are locked into lowest cost relationships. So, instead of being small and gee, that's my disadvantage, in fact, that's really your advantage.
I agree, and I think part of what we do that sets us apart is that we have a made-to-order part of our model, as well as an in-stock, ready-to-ship part of our model. But I think my biggest challenge, as a vertical manufacturer, correct, we create, we produce, and we sell our product, is the barrier to entry. So some of these really amazing digital tools, these really amazing resources that could help us get better data on who our consumer is so we could predict more accurately and forecast what we can make or should not make. Those resources are limited to businesses of my size. So what resources are there, or what can be done to assist smaller designers like myself to have more access to those tools
So I'd
so
love
we
to
can
speak
grow?
to that. So just a little bit of context. So I've been in the industry for far too long, but I love it. I'm obsessed with it. All of the manufacturing, I've worked for mostly vertical companies, but all the manufacturing I've ever done was in the US or Latin America. A year ago, I went to work for the largest manufacturer in South Asia. You're like, hold on a second, did you go to the other side? No, I went there because there's a lot of technology and really great resources that exist in places where we can get a good return on investment for new technologies and better processes. And so the factories in South Asia are amazing. I mean, there's some factories in China that are amazing. So what we're doing now is we need an offshore, nearshore, onshore presence, the hardest of which is an onshore presence with smaller companies. So rather than coming in and building a big factory, we're more interested in saving the existing infrastructure for smaller businesses. So what I would implore you to do is, let's chat later. How do we work with you to share some work and offer our customers last minute supply flexibility? And even, when the study comes out, you'll see even a 5% postponement amount, which means you make 95% of what you need for the season, and then hold the last 5%, even a small piece of postponement like that makes a huge impact on you get higher revenue, higher margin, and lower inventory. So what you're doing is very valuable. You have to partner up with someone. You can't do it by yourself. There are agencies, there are other manufacturers. It's not either you or me, it's both of us together.
Correct. All right, great. Well, I don't drink coffee, but I love bubble tea. So if anyone wants some bubble tea, I'll treat you.
I think Jen had something. Jen, do you still have something?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you kind of started is you create, you manufacture, and you sell. And the inevitable goal for everybody is to move to either create, sell, manufacture, or even sell, create, then manufacture from a more customization perspective. And so,
Jill.
to me after you asked me if I had a question, that I had actually a very important point. First, I mean, I would just want to commend this panel here. This represents transformation that is so desperately needed, and it represents a different mindset and a transformative model that we need to mobilize. And we need to mobilize it, I will go ahead and say, with a female-led coalition. And I'm going to say that because it's been built on the backs of women. We know this industry, and that we're the ones that can lead this transformation with our male partners and thought leaders. And there has to be a mobilization. How many of you would like to see action versus talking? I mean, I'm sick of it. I don't care if I ever go to the festival. But we need to leave here with mobilization. And it can't be by rubbing pennies together. It cannot be. We have some of the solutions right here. So I would just like to encourage us to not stop asking the question how we mobilize this from here. You all are my heroes, and I think have a great view of how we can try new things. So I would just like to say that great job convening. You know, this group, we were saying earlier, Brad and I, how important it is to bring together this really diverse group of global representation, which is desperately needed. We're in it together, not alone. So I guess my comment is more of a question. How do we mobilize? How do we mobilize?
That's fantastic. See what I mean? You're my hero, Jen. If I can implore us, we have to make sure that our message gets to the retail buyer. So the retail buyer is the one that's getting dinged for all the markdown and stockouts. They're ultimately responsible for that, and they need a more, flexible, sustainable supply chain for so many reasons. So I think there's too much separation. So buyers and suppliers in fashion is not just buyers being sourcing teams and suppliers being manufacturers, but how do we connect end to end and understand the consumer is king, but the gateway to the consumer is the retail buyer. And I think when we say buyers, sometimes there's a confusion. Retail buyers, the merchant that's pulling the trigger, buying the goods, managing stocks from location to location. It's a very difficult job. I would argue that the two hardest jobs in the industry is a retail buyer and accounts receivable. It's very hard.
That's an interesting
You
note.
sure you want to follow that? Okay. All right, last 1 minute question.
I'm talking from the manufacturer's point of view. Of course, the study is well taken, and it's a fantastic study, which you have been doing. Productivity and the production cost is very, very important. And in the entire value chain, of course, even though your value chain is very, very efficient, but there is a trade dynamics. I mean, somewhere the preferential treatment is there to certain regions. And although one country is in a position to manufacture at, efficient level, but when it crosses the border and enters into the consumer's country, then it becomes that, FTAs are there, trade preferences are there, tariff is there. Whether these factors also are taken in the study and how that will be affecting ultimate the study and the trade.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Gee, what you're saying is that there are differences in the productivity between countries, and added on top of that are differences in trade preferences, so you get a different cost structure. I think maybe one important element of this is that the competition changes to be not so much on those cost factors, but on the reduction of the risk, of the fashion risk, which means that a manufacturer that is able to really reduce the costs of non-sold goods inventory for its client has the best competitive position, almost regardless of the import duties.
That's an efficiency concern, and it's a genuine concern, but it's not where the big opportunity is. So this question, whether you're in Sri Lanka and you're learning to, or you're able to compete with China, or whether you're in the US and you're competing with the Americas, or whether you're concerned about the sort of rising capability at Shein and Temu, you know, everyone, there's a response to all of that. And the response is using your upstream levers to create downstream value for that retailer. Cost of goods sold is maybe 15 to 20% of the whole equation. So you have to think in terms of how upstream levers create downstream value, and that is the proposition that you take to retailers. They're waiting to hear it, and I think Brad is giving us affirmation that that is in fact true.
I've even been told, oh my gosh, I didn't know this existed. And I've even had folks internally say, how do you know they're gonna do it? Well, have you presented the alternative? No, I haven't. I guess you have a point. Present it, present the alternative. Right now, we just walk in and say, what do you wanna buy? It's not exciting. And what's the alternative? You know, in Scott's case, make some up front, we'll hold the last piece, we can figure out what to print and what part of the United States, what zip code does it need to go to? Because we can allocate inventory to the wrong place and then it's too costly to transfer it. There's so many things that we can offer that are non-price.
I also think very quickly, just to finish off on that, it's about the data. We didn't really speak about the data, right? So, you know, taking the traditional gatekeepers, to Brad's point, call them gatekeepers, I'm not sure if that's all right, but you know, the people that ultimately have the leverage over, we're going to buy that and how many, you know, quantities, you know, make it more dynamic in the sense that when something comes in, the computer says that's going onshore, that's going nearshore, that we'll place that offshore. So I think, you know, coming back to the presentation yesterday around AI and leveraging data in that way is essential as well.
Yeah, that adds into the conversation.
Yeah, sharing that data. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you all.